You're back in the shop with me today, guys, and this week on the channel, I'm gonna build a cutting board with a magnetic prep bowl. So, stick around. I'm Stoner Ericson from Ericson Design Company, and let's build something. Ta-da! An old friend of mine reached out to me on Instagram and asked if I would make them a cool cutting board with some kind of custom engraving on it. And as her and her husband went back and forth on what they wanted engraved, they ended up settling on their family name, something really classy. So we're gonna build them a really cool end grain cutting board, a little bit larger than one you'd get at a store. Then to elevate it, we're gonna add a magnetic prep bowl on top. That way this bowl will click into the magnets and stay really secure. And as she's cutting her vegetables, she can just toss her onions in the bowl, then move them to the stove. Plus, this can also serve as like a dip bowl for a charcuterie board or chips and salsa. So I think it's gonna be a really fun project. In the scrap wood pile, I actually have an offcut from a butcher block countertop I did 2 years ago. This has been floating around the shop, and I think it'd be a perfect way to use it up and to help out a friend. Straight out of the gate here, we're gonna cut 6 inches off this board. I'm gonna use that offcut to make the bowl. Now, it's important that you're super safe on these saws. I'm not gonna use this long push stick. I'm actually gonna use a different push stick that holds the piece down because they're only gonna be 1-inch pieces. This is gonna be a way safer way to cut these. Then I'm gonna cut them down into 1-inch strips. I'm actually have an off table that is letting them fall off the table instead of me trying to reach across the blade. Next, I'll vacuum up all the dust with my new Dust Right dust collection system, and I'll blow it off with the air compressing hose. Now I want to make a place where I can glue these up with clamps. So I'll take a little paper off of my workbench, I'll grab my clamps, and then I'm going to lay out how I want them to go. I'm going to reverse every other one so that I have kind of a cool pattern. Once I have it how I like it, I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to mark the top of it so I kind of know how it goes back on. Then I'm going to take a strip of wood that I'm going to use to clamp down on each side to keep it nice and flat, and I'm going to put tape on the top of those and the bottom of those. That way the glue will stick to the tape, not the wood, and it'll be easier to take off. I'll also go ahead and I'll put tape on the actual clamps. I don't want to get glue on them. These are new cabinet clamps I've got. They actually didn't work as well as bar clamps, but I want to mitigate the glue squeeze out as much as possible and getting stuck everywhere. I'll liberally put glue all over one side of each of them, stack them up, line them back up to the lines I drew in them, and then I'll clamp my little brace boards to the back and the side in the middle, and then I'll really clamp it up really nice and tight. You gotta love that sexy glue squeeze out. It's so satisfying. I freaking love it. Then we're gonna try to get as much of that glue off as we can. This is a super important step. Letting the glue set up and get kind of hard, the harder shell and the inside soft, is super easy to clean up. Next, we're heading over to our X-Carve. This is how we're going to make the bowl. We're going to do like a stacked bowl. So we're going to carve a base and then 3 rings that we'll glue up together in the end. Now, one of my subscribers said, hey, you need to get a lathe. I want a lathe so bad. I have my eye on the 1840 Jet. It's like $2 grand. Will I ever get it? I don't know, but it's definitely one of my dream tools. I'll probe the machine and then put the cover on, and then let's get to carving. If you like fun and creative videos like this, hit that subscribe button. Do it, and do it now. Plus, leave me a comment, guys. I'd love to hear from you. Also, follow me on Instagram. I do previews to all these projects, and it's a great way to stay in the loop. After the carve is finished, I'll move the X-Carve back, and then I'm going to take my dust collector and I'm going to clean up all the dust. There's something so satisfying to me about vacuuming out dust. I don't have the dust attachment on my X-Carve because I have this cover, and it keeps the noise down and all the dust in. I'll pull the carve up, remove the double-sided tape I use as a secondary precautionary measure, and then I'm going to move over to this Jet 1632 drum sander. I'm just going to sand off the back of this just a little bit. It seemed like it didn't carve evenly because I had that double-sided tape on there. I love this tool. This is my new favorite tool. It takes the sanding time and cuts it down to 1/3 of what it used to be. It's so much fun to use and so satisfying. Over at the main workbench, I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to cut out the tabs. On the end grain side of this, they're kind of easy to cut out because the grain follows. But where the grain goes across, they're kind of hard and you want to make sure that they're cut out correctly. They are going to have a little of their tab left over, so after I kind of stack it up and look at it, I'm going to head over to the oscillating sander and I'm going to gently just take off that tab. I really don't want to change the outside of this much because they're going to stack together, so I just want to take off the tab. And then I'll take the oscillating attachment and I'll round out the inside of these. I had this spindle on upside down, so I ultimately ended up fixing that. I'll throw a little paper up on the actual table so I don't get glue everywhere, and then I'll spread the glue liberally, a ton of glue on these. That's what's going to be holding them together. There's no nails, there's no fasteners. And here's a little trick that I do. I put heavy glue and I don't try to clamp it when the glue's wet. I actually give it about 5 minutes to set up, and the glue kind of adheres. And if you know when you glue things up, you're trying to glue it up super wet, the glue will slide all around. There's tricks like using salt to help it not move and all of that, but just let it sit up for 5 minutes. Then again, I'll clean up as much glue as I can inside and out while it's wet so that I don't have to do that later. Put the spindle correctly on the sander, and now I'm going to round out that inside and really spend some time finessing it and making sure it's just beautiful on the inside. Then I'll go ahead and glue the bottom on. I'll use that same technique. I'll spread heavy glue, I'll set the bottom on it, let the glue kind of set up for about 5 minutes, and then when I come back, that bottom won't be squirrely and moving all around when I put my clamps on. I'll clamp it up and let that dry and set it aside. Then I'll move over to the actual cutting board. I'll remove those clamps, and what you don't see here is I tend to try to put all the clamps away when I take them off. It doesn't always work out, but it's better for me just to try to put the larger ones away instead of have them rolling around the shop. And then I'll use my chisel and the hammer that I built. If you want to see how I built this mallet, check out my other videos. And I'll go ahead and pull off the cross braces, and you can see the tape sticks down and the actual braces come right up. And then I'll clean up what little glue is left over from that on the main workbench. I also take an 80 grit and I run over the top of it with the glue, but the glue is still going to kind of ride high on the piece, so it takes a lot of time sanding that off. This is why, again, I love this 1632. I can make multiple passes very easy. This took about 10 minutes to get this thing through and completely sand it up. You can see there I can hang the side out. I can hang up to another 16 inches out the side of it. This tool is so awesome. It's my favorite tool right now. Next, I'm going to square this piece up. I'm going to use my tapering jig, and I'm going to make a square line with a pencil on the back. I'll use my braces to hold it down. I'll raise my blade up the correct height and I'll slowly pass it through. Next, I'm going to check for square for this first pass, and it was spot on with this giant level, so I was so stoked that it actually got super square with that first pass. Then I'm going to cut off the other sides. Now that I have two square sides, I can just nip off the other sides, making this thing perfectly square. The glue on the actual bowl has dried and set up, so I'm going to take it over to the oscillating sander and I'm going to clean up the outside of it the best I can. Then I'm going to take 220 and an orbital sander and I'm going to run over this. This bowl came out super awesome. It's so smooth. Now we'll take the actual cutting board over to the X-Carve. I'm going to carve like a cool honeycomb pattern and my friend's last name in it. I'm also going to carve my juice groove in here. And since I can't screw down through the piece, I'm going to use these little wedges that I made out of walnut. You want to use a hardwood when you're using these wedges, but that'll hold it flat to the table. I'm not using double-sided tape here because of the way it angled the last time. I'll home the machine, probe it, and then I'll cover it, and then let's get to carving. Now, as this carves, let me say that I have really screwed up these projects at this point. So knowing that, I took a piece of scrap wood and I actually test carved 3 different times to make sure that I had everything correctly. So make sure you're doing that. You don't want to screw these up and have to start over. Again, I'll vacuum off all the dust. I'll pull off my little tabs that are holding it down. And then I'm going to move over to a really cool step. I'm going to mix my epoxy by cutting down some of these red solo cups, measuring it out, adding my resin first and then my hardener on top of that. And then I'm gonna mix it for about 3 minutes. And as I'm mixing it, you can feel the resin kind of heat up a little bit. And you can see I'm wearing gloves here. I tend to get this all over myself. But next I'm gonna add the coloring. I went with a really cool gold flake because it's a honeycomb. And I thought that would be really cool. And then black. Now here's my new favorite thing. These are these little syringes with a really detailed end, and this is gonna help me to actually get the resin right where I want it. This worked so well. I don't think I'm gonna actually be using the vinyl anymore, even though people ask me about that all the time. I'm able to do basically a 2-color epoxy right here because I'm not pushing the resin everywhere. I'm putting it right where I want it. This was one of my favorite things. I'm gonna put a link to these in the description below because they worked so freaking well, and I absolutely loved how easy it was and how much control I had over this super sticky resin. To pop any of the air bubbles, I'm going to run a hot lighter over it. This will draw them to the surface and it'll pop them. And then back over to my favorite tool. This was like 4 minutes of passes and I got all that epoxy off. Normally I sand it and work really hard to get that off. It came out so freaking well. I love this 1632. I know I keep saying that, but I absolutely love it. Next, I'm just going to take a fender washer and draw off to round over the corners. Then I'll move over to the rigid oscillating sandal and I'll just kind of finesse and freehand those corner roundovers, make them nice and smooth. This will be the first time this router table is on camera. I actually set up a nice roundover and I'm going to round over all 4 sides. I'm going to take a 1 3/8 inch Forstner bit and I'm going to hog out a place for my magnetic bowl to go. And in testing this, it actually worked really, really well, but I am going to hog it out a little bit more and bring that magnet just a little bit closer to it. Use the JB Weld 5-minute 2-part epoxy. I'll mix it up and I'll put the magnets down there. I'm doing this on the table saw because the cast iron will suck the magnet down. I cut these little plugs so no one will ever know. I sanded this bad boy down to 220 and then I made this cool mineral bath box. Basically it's just a little box that I can fill with mineral oil and reuse. They don't really make those tubs big enough for this. Is 17.5 by 22.5, so it's hard to get one of those big tubs. But this works so well and I just pour a bunch of food grade mineral oil right inside of it and let it soak for about 35-40 minutes. I then wipe it off and then I let it dry for about 2 or 3 hours. Then I come back and I put it in upside down the other way for about another 35-45 minutes. This is going to let that food grade oil soak all the way through so it won't dry out being washed. It will definitely help mitigate any bacteria that could form in the cuts that you make on this board. Now, one of the reasons I made this little box, and again, you can see how I made this in the description below, is so I can reuse my oil. So I'll take a bucket and my trash can and I'll pour the oil into the bucket. Now I spilled a little in the corner, but man, for 3/4 of a gallon of oil, that's not a bad deal. I'll go ahead and wipe it out and then I'll set it aside to dry. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a funnel and I want to reuse this oil. So I'll duct tape the funnel to the top of the old canister and then I'm going to get my wife to help me. She's going to actually hold the funnel and the bottle so I can pour the oil back in its original container. That way I can reuse it again. I really don't want a big bus tub of oil floating around my shop. It's not what I want to do. You can see here I actually used about 1/4 of the oil and I spilled a little bit, but I can reuse this oil over and over again. To finish this guy off, I'm going to let this dry for a few hours and then I'm going to use walrus oil. It's my favorite finishing oil because it has beeswax. It also has mineral oil as well, but this will finish it off so nicely and I'll let it dry for 24 hours. What a cool project. I hope Ra and her family are really gonna love that. I love this magnetic prep board. It just clips on. You can use it for dips and all kinds of cool stuff for charcuterie board. The carve came out so awesome. I love this. You can see the subscriber count right now. We're up to 745. I think when we started this, we were somewhere in the 730s. So that's pretty dang good. If you're not subscribed, do it and do it now. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Stoner Ericson from Ericson Design Company, and we built something. Ta-da!